Right on. So, having a discussion the other day with a guy who is an educated sociologist and employed at a university in Chicago, and we got a discussion about racism, and his position was basically that, and I didn't quite get this clarified, but I was wondering if this is the actual curriculum that they're pushing through to people. He said you can't be racist if you're black in the United States, because one of the defining characteristics, fundamental aspects of being a racist was to have power as an aggregate. So to say, the statement, you can't be racist if you're black, obviously that doesn't make any sense. Of course you can be racist if you're black. Power, which it was assumed and just flowed in the conversation what we're talking about was political power, has nothing to do with whether one is a racist when it comes to their mind state or outlook, right? But if in your mind, if you accept this to be true, then I guess it makes perfect sense. But even then, as an aggregate, really doesn't make any sense either, because no group as an aggregate has so-called power in that sense, except for the group that has power over whatever in a particular instance. Like what I asked him then was, well, what if a black guy who hates white guys goes out and commits a hate crime against a white guy and gets away with it? He's not punished by the state or not caught by anyone else, not punished by the next of kin or anybody else who takes vengeance for his crime. He has successfully implemented power over someone in a manner, so is he now a racist? Even by that standard, I don't see why he wouldn't be. He has successfully achieved power and he has implemented actions and things which are based on his racist outlook, that he hates white people for whatever reason, just because they're white or whatever, It's pretty absurd to say that you can't be a racist in any area unless you're have power, unless you have political power, the means to facilitate your racist belief. Everyone, to some extent or another, has the means to facilitate their racist belief over someone who is weaker than them or whatever else. We're specifically talking about in the power sense, or the violation of rights in my mind. Because if some guy is rich and he has a lot of property and he's racist and he won't sell to blacks or he won't sell to Chinese or whatever, he's not violating anyone's rights by doing that. He has the right to sell his property to whoever, and he has the right not to for whatever reason. That's what ownership and property right is. So that's really not what we're talking about. That's not power in that sense that we discussed, though he might accept that and consider that power. But even in that case, even in every case, there's black congressmen. But then his response to that was, they don't have power as an aggregate. And it's just this whole concept of aggregate and groupthink, and the notion that a group of individuals constitutes something more and fundamentally unique from the group of individuals. Like, you don't think of a dozen donuts as being something fundamentally different than a donut. It's just a group of donuts, right? It doesn't have any other unique characteristics. It's just a bunch of donuts. Just as a group is a group of individuals. It's a bunch of individuals. So the concept where aggregate power, the concept of this aggregate and of power being a defining characteristic of whether or not one is a racist is absurd, because there are racists in basically every race or ethnicity or whatever, right? I would assume maybe not, but I would assume that's the case. Racism doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you have power. If you are a black guy who's dirt poor living on the street and you hate white guys, you're racist, because they're white and the white guy this and the white guy that. If you're a Chinese guy who's poor and living on the street and you hate black guys, you're racist or whatever. Racism has nothing to do with power. And that whole concept is basically nonsense for those two reasons. Is one, power has nothing to do with whether or not one's outlook is racist, and the concept of aggregate power itself is just total nonsense. It doesn't matter if you have power or if your group has power. And furthermore, that entire outlook itself basically is racist. Like, you are looking at the world through a lens that everyone is separated by race. Now, biologically, race, breed, whatever you'd want to call it. Yeah, maybe there are some superficial and a little bit more than superficial differences between the various types of humans that exist on the planet, but just to look at that as your whole perspective, to look out there and see aggregate whites have power over aggregate blacks, it's just, that doesn't make any sense, and that is essentially, in my opinion, a racist outlook. I attempted to explain methodological individualism. And his view on that was that it's improper to view every exchange as an exchange between individuals, but really it's not, because that's all that's going on. Even if you have 15 individuals, there's not a fundamentally different entity. The group doesn't have a mind. There's not a different entity that constitutes the group as opposed to 15 individuals, right? So aggregate and aggregate power are nonsense concepts, and power as being a defining characteristic as to whether or not one is racist, the defining criteria, is nonsense as well. Like that this whole discussion it really didn't get anywhere. But if you ever encounter that, I'm just kind of putting that out there for that, because that blew my mind, where the first statement he said was, I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but then it turned into, well, you can't be black, or you can't be racist if you're black. And I said, what does that mean? That's total nonsense. Of course you can. It doesn't matter what race you are. You can be racist regardless of what race you are. Like, that's not a fundamental characteristic of racism.